Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. Just order. It's nice to have the convivial conversation. Good catch, Tony. My name's Mark Rowland. I'm the Chief Executive of the Mental Health Foundation. We're really happy to have you all here. We've been in this new office for a few months now, but this is the first time we've brought the external world in. And it's really fantastic to see so many of you here. Thanks very much for coming. We're here to launch the new report, Young, Green and Well, from parts of London. Tony Leach came and said, could we host the event here? And we were really happy to do that. And maybe I just want to say a few words about why we as the Mental Health Foundation have engaged a lot with the question of nature, of green spaces and a connection towards mental health. We ran a cross-sectional survey during the pandemic. We did one of the first longitudinal research studies looking at the impacts of the pandemic on mental health. We looked at what people were doing to cope with the pandemic, and the number one coping mechanism that came up through the surveys was that connection to nature was the main way that people were dealing with the stress, with the anxiety. It was one of the few ways you could safely connect with other people during the pandemic. And so we decided in 2021 that we were going to focus Mental Health Awareness Week, which we run each year, on the question of nature. And we ran a separate research study looking at what are the benefits of nature, who's benefiting, and what are the barriers that we need to overcome. And it was really interesting seeing during that week the stories pouring out of different people's connection to nature. We know that the natural world and the depth of our individual understanding and connection to nature makes a difference. People who have a deep and long-lasting connection with nature often fueled when they were a child, report being happier and report having a more meaningful life. It's like there's a deep connection between nature and finding a sense of purpose and making sense of this world that we have landed in. We also saw that there is some worrying trends that people can get disconnected from nature, especially in the teenage years. And the longer they stay disconnected from nature, the longer it takes for that to reconnect. There are lots of really interesting things. You'll be happy to look on our website for some of the insights that we found around the relationship between nature and exercise, for example. But we also looked at the barriers, and we took our campaign working with lots of others in the conservation environment sector, looking at what changes we want to see, and one of the key ones was around quality and access to nature, and especially for young people. We found that there were particular groups that were mirrored whose mental health suffered worse, who were also gaining less access to nature. There were people with disabilities, there were people from minority ethnic communities, and there were young people, students in particular. So really delighted to be here with you today. I'm going to hand on to Joanne McCartney, who's the Deputy Mayor for the GLA for Children and Young People. We've got a really rich evening for you. Sit back, relax. We'll have some Q&As at the end, and please take the opportunity to listen, engage, and meet with each other at the end. So thanks very much. Joanne.
Thank you, Mark. Can I just start by thanking you for hosting us this evening? We are really appreciative of that. And I can also thank Parks for London for authoring this report. And I'm delighted to be here because my role, as you can see, is Deputy Mayor for Children and Families. And a lot of the work we've been dealing with is sort of brought together in this one report. So the Mayor has invested quite a lot of money over the last few years in supporting young people, in particular the age group we're talking about, 16 to 25, in youth activities. And a lot of that is around mentoring and supporting young people's mental health and well-being. And there's been a lot of work in our environment team and planning team going in how we bring that green infrastructure and give it actually more prominence in all our planning policies. And we've invested in improving green spaces in every single borough in London. So this report quite nicely brings those two things together. And can I just say, from a personal point of view, And as a mother who had 3 children in that age bracket during the pandemic, I just know how important it was for them to actually get out of the house and have a walk around the local park. And actually it was often the only place they could actually meet their friends. I don't know if you remember, but well, I think we all remember, but it seems like a lifetime ago now that we were allowed out for one, was it half an hour period or something every day, or to go to the shop once a day. And that transition from adolescence to an adulthood is actually fraught with lots of difficulties and change anyway, and to have this on top I think was really difficult for lots of our young people. And a lot of the evidence that we heard from the pandemic and has been shown is that young people, one of those groups that were disproportionately affected by the pandemic, not able to see their peers and get that support from that support group, not able to see family members. And we talk about disruption to education, but actually we know that from surveys that have been done that over half our young people say that their mental health and well-being deteriorated over that 2 years. And we know that there's going to be quite a long tail to that going forward. So the other thing I really want to say is that London is really a young city. You know, nearly a third of our population is below the age of 25, so it's really important we get this right. And we do know that access to green spaces is often dependent on where you live in our city as well. So areas that are areas of deprivation have a lot less access. I represent Enfield and Haringey on the London Assembly. That strip along the Upper Lee Valley, but the strip that joins the Upper Lee Valley was the most deprived part of my borough, and you can knock on doors of roads that back onto the Lee Valley, and people are actually not aware that that magnificent country park is actually there, just a short stroll away. So I think we've also got a lot of work to do to actually, if you like, advertise the spaces that we do have. So can I just say thank you again to Parks for London. I think the recommendations that we're going to hear about today are going to be really important for us policymakers when we're devising how we go about improving our green spaces, but also to make them a welcoming place for our young people. And so I know we've got at least one of the young people that took part in that who's going to be answering questions a little later. But one of the things we're very keen to do is that young people are actually at the heart of our policy making, and so I think this report is important from that point of view as well. So can I just say thank you very much for hosting us today to Parks for London, and I'm really looking forward to the presentation on the report. Thank you. Oh, and I should have introduced Hamida, who was an author of the report. Apologies.
Thank you so much. Let me just get my placing right. Wow, there's so many of you and so many familiar faces, so thank you all for coming. Hi everyone, I'm Hamida. I'm one of the authors of this report, and I'm so happy to be sharing with you some of the key findings I want to share with you today. So this includes some of the ways in which green spaces affect young people's mental health, how the surrounding environments can impact young people's use of green spaces, and some of the challenges and lessons learned with engaging with young people for this research. So why is this research important? Well, the GLA initiated the research in part based on several pledges from the Mayor of London's manifesto regarding improving opportunities for young Londoners, and this includes improving the environment and their mental health. Mental health and well-being issues for young people, 16 to 25-year-olds, have been increasing pre-pandemic and have worsened during the pandemic. And between 2015 and 2021, mental health related prescriptions or events involving a GP increased threefold. We also have increasing evidence that connects exposure to nature with mental health benefits. So for example, for young people, this is increasing benefits in stress reduction, improving academic performance, increased concentration and socialization. So all really good things for them. However, young people use parks less than any other age group. So we wanted to figure out why this is. So what are the barriers to access and how can we improve them? How did we do this? The study had 2 phases. Phase 1 consisted of an online survey where we developed a general understanding of what young people thought about green spaces, how they normally use them, and some of the benefits that they thought green spaces brought to them. And from there we were able to go to phase 2. Phase 2 involved interviews with young people, where we explored the ideas they identified in the surveys more deeply and brainstormed solutions and ideas with them so we can figure out these problems together. It was important to us that young people's voices were central to the research, and if you look at the findings of the report, we quote young people directly. Young people from the GLA's peer outreach team also provided key feedback in the appropriate language to use when we were asking young people questions, and this was incredibly helpful. The findings of the research was very, very surprising in many ways. So you heard young people say things like, we feel like we don't feel welcome in green spaces, or we can't prioritise our mental health. And so it was interesting to hear some of these specific things coming from young people, but also surprising in a different way that young people said they wanted clean, green, beautiful green spaces, the same thing we all want from our parks and green spaces. So that was also very interesting. Over half of young people said that they visit green spaces because they find them beautiful, they wanted a variety of plants and flowers that change through the seasons, and because they found them stimulating and inspiring. 70% of survey respondents said that they visit green spaces because they visit green spaces with friends, and the lack of provisions like clean toilets, tables and benches, adequate shelter from weather made it difficult for them to properly socialise in these areas. Poor maintenance not only prevented young people from visiting green spaces, but also led to worse mental health as they saw a green space, a community asset, going to waste. As expected, safety was a key barrier to access, and the importance of having well-lit and supervised green spaces with good phone signal was highlighted. Previous crimes in and around green spaces can have an impact on safety perceptions years later. News stories and personal experiences become cautionary tales, and this turns a previously well-loved green park into empty. One young person suggested implementing a recovery plan when such incidences occur, so that the community can move forward together. Park staff not only provide added safety, but also a source of information and guidance. 16% of survey respondents didn't feel confident using green spaces, and 12% felt like they lacked the appropriate information on what to do in these places. So seeing a familiar face adds to feelings of welcome. Seeing different types of park users in green spaces, taking part in activities, even if they didn't want to take part in activities, made them feel like their park was well loved, and that also improved mental health. Young people said that spending time in green spaces was extremely important for their mental health, and the main reasons they visit green spaces was to escape life's day-to-day stresses and to relax. And so having a quiet oasis away from everyone was key for them, so that they could be alone. However, as they grew older, 2 issues arose. A growing feeling of aging out of green spaces, and a continuing pressure at home, school and work left them with little time to prioritise their mental health. They shared stories of park users kicking them out of certain areas as it wasn't for them. One young person said, "I'm turning 18 soon, I'd love for there to be swings." They pointedly discussed how aware they are of the importance of taking care of their mental health, but increasing responsibilities left them with no time to focus on themselves. Moreover, some shared that the lack of mental health resilience skills to do so. "You're made to think that your work is more important than anything else," one young person said. Interactions they had with green spaces as children remained influential many years later, indicating the importance of not only early exposure to nature, but also a need for a continuum of experiences with nature as children transition into adults. So here's a quote I thought was really interesting. I feel like schools have an understanding that there has to be a work-life balance, and this is something we've all said to each other, that it's interesting coming from a young person. And we were interviewing 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, and so it's not something we associate with them. One thing we learnt from this whole research process was that surveys are not the best ways to engage with young people. Interview participants said that they preferred being part of the solution building process in the interviews, and so creating meaningful places for them to be key stakeholders was important. And it's the foundation of improving engagement. Partnering with organisations that work directly with young people is also essential, as it took us directly to them. Here we were able to share the vision of the research and highlight the importance of the work we were doing. And finally, paying for their time. Treating young people as experts and recognising that their time is as valuable as ours allows for an equal exchange. So these recommendations I've pulled a few from the report. There's many more, but these are based on the feedback from the young Londoners, and these are particularly relevant to you guys, I hope, as policymakers and project initiators. Identifying where there is inaccessibility or exclusion of young people in green space design, maintenance, management, decision making, providing shelter and all weather spaces that so young people feel safe and welcome to visit parks alone and when socialising. Having places where they can call it their own. Helping young people prioritise their mental health by connecting them with local green social prescribers and activities. And also intervening as early as possible to foster this connection with nature, which is so beneficial. I believe that these recommendations are incredibly important, as young people stated consultation fatigue and scepticism that the work we were doing would lead to any sort of positive or meaningful change in policy or practice. Many of the participants were recruited through networks like the peer outreach team, and so young people we spoke to were highly engaged in issues of mental health and green space use. And given the number and the makeup of the participants, this research is not fully representative of all young Londoners. This was particularly evident in the interviews where we had an underrepresentation of men. I think we had 3 young men join us out of all the participants. And this could be perhaps the focus around mental health in this piece of work, and further research is needed on how the best ways are to engage with young men, particularly when talking about their mental health. Almost all of the participants we spoke to had an interest in green spaces and knew of some of the benefits, and so it would have been even better if we could reach non-green space users, as we would have provided an opportunity for even deeper analysis on what barriers those people who are not interested in green spaces are. Also, interestingly, data on 16 to 25-year-olds is lacking or inconsistent. Much of the data focuses on under 16s, or 16-year-olds are lumped in with adults, and so this makes it difficult when we're trying to compare different types of research. Further research on this specific age group is needed, specifically adolescence to adulthood, as we know that young people are going through a distinct phase in personal development and increasing pressures and responsibilities. But despite this, both the surveys and the interviews were able to reach young Londoners across all of London's boroughs, apart from 4. Okay. Few of these recommendations can be solved by one service sector alone, and as these issues are very complex. So therefore, a collaborative approach is needed that involves several professions working together. Statutory, voluntary, and most importantly, locally based. Moreover, there's a clear call for young people to be at the centre and be involved in the process throughout. It won't be straightforward or easy, but the outcomes will be life-changing. So how can we do this? As a starter, we've set up a shared document to help stakeholders like you start collaborating on delivering some of the recommendations of the report, and we invite you to get involved into maximising the mental health and wellbeing benefits for young people through the use of green spaces. Thank you so much for listening. We'll now be moving on to the Q&A section with one of my amazing participants, and Meredith, who's part of Parks for London's Research in Residence team. Well, one person. But yeah, we're really looking forward to the Q&A section, so thank you so much. Tony?
So we're just going to move some furniture and invite three of you to come and speak with one another.
Yeah.
I'll
Yes, please.
because of the sound system in this room, when we do come to the open session of asking questions, if you could speak loudly and clearly, that would really help for the pickup, because this is being recorded so that people who couldn't be here this evening can watch it as a legacy film on YouTube. So I'm going to let you introduce yourselves, kick off, and then open it more widely. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm Hamida. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask you, both of you, a question before we start. So what are your names and what's your local green space park next to you?
So I'm Muska, I'm the participant, and my local green space is Marcus Garvey Park, which is like in West Kensington. It's just like a little one next to 2 primary schools, yeah.
Hi, I'm Meredith Whitten, and my local park is Wandsworth Park. I can see it from my window. It's about a 2-minute walk from my block.
Beautiful. Yes. So while everyone else is getting used to the content, and before they ask you questions, I'll ask you some questions alongside Meredith. And I want to ask you, what are some of your most fond memories in green spaces?
I think most of my most fond memories in green spaces are probably from my childhood. So during my childhood, green spaces were just like the default thing. Like whenever there would be an event, if there was a birthday party, we'd have like a water fight in the local park, or if it was like anything, like a weekly picnic with my family, meet up with some family friends, whatever it might be, it's always at a green space. I'm near Holland Park and Hyde Park as well, which obviously benefits that. But yeah, bunch of memories.
You want me to answer too? Oh. Yeah, repeat the question.
Some of your fondest memories in parks?
Yeah, I was thinking of this as y'all were talking earlier. I am not a young person anymore.
Very young, very, very young.
Young at heart. But I very distinctly remember being taken to the Fort Worth Nature Center in Fort Worth, Texas, where I grew up, and having activities to do, and how powerfully impressionable that was on me throughout.
Okay.
And I mean, I went on to get a PhD basically in urban green space, so it had some kind of impact on me. Yeah.
I've been told to move the slides forward 1 second. Oh no, I don't know how to use this. Janice?
Yep.
I can't even see it. Okay.
It's right there.
There you go. Awesome.
Oh, there you go.
Perfect. How do you normally use green spaces today, so as a young adult?
I think I still use green spaces for quite like a range of activities, as I was giving examples before. I think, as you were saying, like whenever you grow up, there's more stuff in your life, there's not enough time to then go to those green spaces. When I do go to green spaces, it's often, firstly, to like reconnect with nature. It's usually like I haven't been to a park in a while, let me actually go to the park and do something that I would usually do at home, maybe read a book, go to the park to do it instead. Also quite a few like social things, especially like with my family. My family are big fans of parks, especially my parents. So any chance we can go to a park, we'll go to a park, have a picnic, throw a ball around, all of that stuff. Hamida was speaking to me about my responses, and apparently, so I use green spaces for exercise quite a bit, like with my older brother specifically. We'll like throw a ball around. He taught me American football. Don't know why I need that, but taught me American football in a park. So any green spaces, lots of exercise and that kind of stuff, which I don't know if that's normal, but yeah. So a bunch of
Normal
stuff.
for you, yes, but loads of our participants said that they wanted to go to the parks by themselves and be alone and just like be in the vibe of it. So that was also very interesting.
Yeah, I think like because when I was brought up, it was always green spaces are mostly a social thing. It's an open space. Why wouldn't you go there with people?
Yeah.
So I think that's just like translated. But also, especially during the pandemic, I was in sixth form during the pandemic doing maths and further maths, so not to stress my shoulders. And I felt like an escape, the oasis thing that you said. That was like my Holland Park for me, and I would go there just randomly. It'd be like 8 p.m. and I'd literally just lie in the grass, and it would solve so many problems. So yeah, I think that hasn't happened that much since the pandemic, just because I've gotten really busy. But ideally, I'd be going to the park by myself as well. Yeah.
Any influential people that you remember from your childhood or now that sort of helped you go into green spaces more?
So as I was saying, my parents love green spaces. So that was definitely like a driving factor. But in terms of like school and primary school, my primary school was quite small, but they very much like pushed green spaces on us because the park was literally like outside. So the usual thing would be you finish school and then you'd play at the park for like 2 hours and then you'd be home. And a key individual was this, I think she was a TA. I'm not actually sure of her position, but she basically really, really loved gardening. And so she kind of introduced it into our school. So she did a bunch of stuff for gardening and green spaces. So she made like flower beds all across of our school. And then she did like a compost initiative. So there were like compost bins. And we all used to get so excited, like throwing out orange peels in there, because then you'd open it and then there'd be like ladybugs and worms and you'd be like, oh my God. And then if there was someone who was like scared of insects, you'd use it against them. And so it was like, I think she was like really, really helpful, because I think before, as I was saying, like green spaces were like a social thing for me. So then they were just like there. I didn't really think about it much. But then she kind of explained to us like the science, I guess, behind it, and like the biology and the ecosystems and that kind of stuff. And in those flower beds that I was speaking about, like someone would like chuck a plastic water bottle in there. And then in our hourly sessions that she had implemented, so she'd have an hour each week with each class, which was like 30 people. And so we'd basically like have to like clean the stuff, and you'd be able to see, you'd be like, oh, okay, who was that who threw the water bottle? And then there'd be fights about it, because you're like, why are you damaging the environment, basically? And I think that was really, really important. And then, yeah, she basically just like actually taught me about green spaces, yeah.
Wow. Any questions from you or anything you want to share, Meredith? Okay. Is the audience ready for some questions for Miska?
Hi, I'm Emma from the Royal Parks. Sadly falling outside the category of young people. I wondered if I could ask if you have any insight on how you really prefer to get information. You know, how do you prefer to find out about parks, what's happening in them? I mean, people often say, oh, young people, social media, but is there more to that? Is it, you know, it was mentioned being part of the solution. Could you elaborate on that in any way?
So for me personally, the main like activity that I took part in a green space was like a gardening thing in Marcus Garvey Park, my local park, and that was spread through like a newsletter that my mum had signed up to. And I think there's also like a bunch of parks have like those notice boards, so like when people are walking past, I now look at that notice board, because before it wasn't being used. Now obviously it's like Marcus Garvey Park, so there's a lot of stuff about Marcus Garvey and racism and activism and that kind of stuff on it now. They kind of like neglected that whole part of its history when I was growing up. But yeah, so I think making use of stuff that is already there, and because the people who are going to go to those events, I think, are people who already attend green spaces, but then don't know what is actually happening in those green spaces, so they go there by themselves to relax, or they go to a picnic or whatnot. And I think other people I've spoken to, they'll be walking past a green space and they'll see an activity happening. So I think maybe, so as I was saying, newsletters, and then like notice boards, and then also just making sure that the activities are accessible. So if someone does walk past, they can just go up and say, hi, what is happening? And it's like, oh, there's yoga, it's on a Thursday at 4:30, come by. That's what I would say.
Just to add to that, loads of young people said that they wanted a variety of different methods. So if it's on social media only, then they might miss it. But having it on notice boards and then a newsletter online, just having it kind of everywhere was really helpful.
Yeah.
And then, yeah.
Firstly, thank you very much for the presentation. It was spot on. I have to say, I'm completely with you on the consultation fatigue. As I'm sure most people in the room are too. So thank you very much for that. By the way, Brian from the RSPB. Probably should have started with that. So apologies in advance. I feel like I'm going to butcher this question stroke statement. But I'm really interested in, we've talked a lot about the kind of nature, response people have when it comes to green spaces and greenery, nature and wildlife, which is what I'm here about. It's the focus for me, certainly. But has there been any part of the conversation that's focused on young people using parks in a very antisocial way, say in the evening, because that in itself is a connection, and also festivals? So I'm sure huge amounts of people in London, particularly under 30, love Box. Now I seem old, can't think of any other festivals. McCartney Park, there are so many, and that again, that's a connection to green spaces, that's a connection to a park. So I'm wondering if those two things have formed part of the conversation or your thinking. And then I have a second question, but I'll wait for that.
In terms of antisocial behaviour, it was one of the safety concerns young people had. So seeing antisocial behaviour, or even young people same age as them who are doing negative things in parks, was a barrier to access. And so they suggested things like, having CCTV, having people in parks that take care of the parks, having extra people in there was really helpful, and just sort of limiting that crime element. And if something really terrible happens, having a way of recovering and the community getting back together and sort of moving forward was key for them. In terms of festivals, I don't remember specific things like festivals being mentioned.
No, I mean, there really didn't come up like big festivals. It was kind of more talked about in the kind of the context of being a part of the community and having, smaller scale festivals maybe, or markets, things kind of happening, at the weekend that were really more just integrated in that local community. Kind of one of the following up on what Hamida said earlier, I thought one of the kind of insightful things that some of the young people said was what might get labeled as antisocial behavior is just social behavior for them.
That's the point I'm making. Yeah, it's kind of how do we leverage the fact they are in a park? They do see that space as an enjoyable space, even though it's nefarious, there's bad things going on to some people. They're still in there, they're still chosen to be in that space to make them happy. So that's something I think we need to recognise.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of them did actually use the term antisocial behavior and sometimes talking about other young people, but there were also, I think, we've got some of the quotes in the report about, we're just having a picnic, but it's called antisocial behavior because of the way we're having the picnic. So you're right, what's social for them isn't necessarily antisocial.
And this feedback that they keep on getting from other park users who tend to be slightly older, which can cause that conflict, and then they're like, we don't want to use the space anymore because they don't feel like it's ours, other people are policing us. That specific word was used, policing us. And it was, and then lots of race stuff came up as well, which was interesting.
Yeah, I was going to add, so in an example that I have is in Marcus Garvey Park, there was like a period where there was these like 8 boys or something like my age, and they used to just like go to the park at like 8 p.m. every day and just play basketball. Fair enough. And I went through a long phase where like every day at like 8 or 9 p.m. I'd go and play basketball, football in the park. And I remember so many times when I was just literally throwing a ball around like it don't matter, and so many people walking past would give me the most suspicious looks and act like I was doing something wrong, even though I'm literally using the services that are there. I'm not doing anything wrong, it's free. The gate's open, there's nothing wrong with it, right? And I think my example is quite a unique one, because even though the area that I live is not good, everyone treats the park as like a neutral space. And so you always, like all the examples that you were giving of like crimes that happen, and then like years along the line, they still talk about it and it's still like a deterrent. In my park, it's just really strange because I think everyone in my area has been there since they've grown up. So they give the park the respect it deserves, basically. And so there's not like many stabbings or anything like that in the place. I remember they made like this beautiful mural, and it was like about Marcus Garvey, and it was about all these other forgot the word, activists, there we go, all these other activists. It was this beautiful mural with like graffiti and beautiful, right? And then the next day, I saw it the first day and I got so excited and I was like, finally this blank wall is being covered up, it's lovely, right? The next day there was graffiti all over it, like racist graffiti, and I was like, are you joking? Like, please don't do this. So it's actually sometimes the opposite of what you would expect, I think, as well, which is interesting.
Okay. First of all, congratulations for this really significant report. Thank you very much. My question is, I noticed that comment you made about how there was a lack of men participating. I just wanted to ask, is it because they were less present in green spaces, or is it because they're more reluctant to be interviewed?
Great question. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe Meredith can add to that, but I think it's many reasons why. So maybe they don't use it the same way women do, or it could be because we spoke a lot about mental health in the research, and so that could be something that they don't want to talk about yet, or they use it differently. So maybe they use sporting stuff more, and maybe girls use it to be more alone and to be with friends. But
yeah, I mean, Judy, that's one of the things we mentioned as being further research, because it was both in the survey and the interview that men were kind of underrepresented. So we kind of speculated on, is that because the topic was about mental health? We did recruit from organizations and networks that have men. So we put the call out and we took the participants that answered that, and it was overwhelmingly female. And the men we had contributed. I mean, they were great. They offered some really great insights, and so I think that is one of the things that needs to follow up from this report, is find out why that was, and get them engaged.
And the insights from the men, were they different?
Actually, I remember one group interview where I was thinking, he would say, maybe he'd play more sports or something, and he was actually very, I don't want to go play sports. I want to go by myself. I want to enjoy nice things. We had someone who wanted to just cycle. Yeah, I remember that as well.
And too soon to say, but some of them did say stuff like, we normally go through parks when we're going to a different place, and so using as a cut through was also important for them. But also younger participants said that as well. So could be not. Loads of questions, more questions than answers.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, really great report. Thanks for presenting it. Majority of young people aren't as active as they should be for their health, and parks are an obvious resource, free resource, aren't they? And I know you talked a bit about the different things that people like to do. Do you have some, rough ratio, if you like, of the kind of things that people, young people that were in your report, wanted to do in parks or did do in parks at all, or is what you've said so far really something of it?
So Hamida's covered some of the things that they said, some of the things that really kind of stand out. Like we said, there were quite a few just wanting to go by themselves and kind of relax, listen to music, podcast. So that kind of from a kind of reflective, independent way. There was really not that much about sport brought up, but a lot of go on a picnic with my friends. One of the things that I remember quite a few people saying was they like to go and actually learn things, like what kind of wildlife is there, what kind of birds, what are the tree species, and we had some recommendations around that, kind of having green space be more educational with a small e, and I think
that covers. Yeah. But most important, I think they wanted to have free time to do kind of whatever they want, and sort of reconnecting with play.
Yeah, the thing, Hamida and I would have kind of a debrief after every interview, and we were just marveled at every single interview. Swings came up, adult swings, and I love to swing still, and we were just like, what is it about swings? And now you'll notice, there's a few places around where you'll see an adult swing, and it really stands out now.
Thank you, this is really interesting. I'm Julia, a councillor from London Borough of Richmond, where we are very fortunate to have a lot of lovely parks, and young people use them in considerable numbers, and I'm really interested in this idea that when they gather in numbers, it's because they feel safe. They go to parks because they feel safe and there's a sense of belonging, but other people who aren't in their group perceive it as a threat. So there's some really interesting tensions around that. But what I wanted to ask you was about, did anything emerge from young people about any anxieties that they have with regards to climate change? One thing that I noticed was young people going to parks through choice to find a big shady tree to just sit under and to be there. And then out in the middle of the parks, you'll see no one at all. It's not that the park isn't being used, it's that they're kind of around the edges where they feel safe, where they feel cool. And I have a perception very much of people, young people, very aware of climate change and what role do our parks have in that. Did anything come out of that at all?
You just threw that on me.
Okay. Do you think about climate change?
Yeah, I think about climate change. I think it is quite evident in parks. I remember when there was like I was about to say heat stroke, heat wave recently, and then I went to Hyde Park a couple of days later and all the grass was like yellow, and I was like, wow, that's crazy. But I think it's only when you actually see it, because I think whenever we're speaking about climate change, it's always like a massive issue, and obviously it is a massive issue. So then when you see it on a local scale and you see the changes that is making in like a little ecosystem or whatever it might be, I think that is actually sometimes more moving because you get to see it physically. So I think that was like one of my like wake up moments where I was like, wow, this is actually like, it's bad, but it's really, 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 really bad. And so I think like the TA that I was talking about with the gardening, I think like that kind of education on that local scale, just in a school, it's an hour a week, it's a primary school, like it's very, very helpful, I think, and that regular education can then benefit that. And also, yeah, I think that's all I got to say, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, when we when Hamida was saying earlier, one of the recommendations about providing shelter, there was kind of what you kind of expect, shelter from the British weather and the rain, but quite a few people said, they want a tree canopy to get out of the sun, and I thought that was, I mean, they didn't directly connect it to climate change, but it was about it's often warmer when I go to the park, and I need a place to kind of take refuge from that. So, yeah.
Hi, I'm Chris Donkin from London Sport. You talked about missing features and poor maintenance. Are there specific features that came up that are missing? I've got 2 young boys, and lack of toilets often restricts us from spending more time in green spaces and things. But did you get any insight as to what those features were?
Lack of toilets. Normally there are benches, but there's no tables. So if they wanted to picnic or to do some work, that's missing. Areas where they can hide from the weather, but also like sort of have their own space and sort of kind of do whatever they want was also was missing. Anything else?
Swings.
Swings. clear swings.
One kind of related to that, there was a few of the groups we talked about, even if there were toilets, you didn't know they were there. So kind of a lack of signage or wayfinding. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
And also some mention information about what to do in the parks, how to use the parks really was helpful. And if a park person or park gardener or a green space, someone who's taking care of the place is not there, having information about what they can do was also really helpful, or would have been really helpful.
Sorry, can I just pick on, in terms of that information, as a young person, do you want that information before you go there or while you're there? Because I guess we live in a digital age where information is free, and if we're not sure what's going to be there, we potentially don't go. Is that an issue that's
I think, interestingly, when we asked about technology, loads of young people did say that we go to parks to not be on our phones.
Yeah. Okay.
So just the way they use technology in parks is slightly different. So they're listening to music. It's more of an added benefit to listen to music, to listen to a podcast, to read, and really having loads of tech stuff, unless it's for safety, wasn't really helpful for them. But I think just signage in the park itself will be really helpful, but also really the benefits of speaking to a gardener or someone who's taking care of the park and building that relationship is also, I think, something we can do.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you want to add anything?
I was just thinking, like, it breaks down into like 2 stages, because you've got the part where they have nothing to do, and then, oh, what should I do? I should go to a park, and then this specific event is available, and then that can go to like the social media newsletters. But I think also, if you're going to be in a park, you're there for a reason, as we've discussed. And so if one of those reasons is to just hang out, sometimes just the notice boards, as I was saying before. So I think both digitally, so that they can access it before they go to the park, or so that they decide to go to a park, and then also while they're in the park, so they can see, oh, there's going to be this event the next day, so maybe I should come again, or right now it's happening, and then let me partake.
And then I'll come back to you. So sorry.
Okay. Richard from the Royal Parks. You mentioned that the participants were interested in the idea of a youth forum, and I was just wondering if you could elaborate on that bit and tell us about the type of influence that the participants were maybe looking to have, and if there was a particular sort of subset of the age range that were given the calls on young people's time, you know, and how, is there a particular section of the participants that were interested in getting involved in that way?
I think the way they described it is, when there's something happening in their parks or their local green space, they don't know what's happening, the changes are made without their sort of influence, and so things are changed and they're not made aware of it, and so being part of the process. So more than just consultation, but they're a key stakeholder, they're in the room when things are being decided. So what are we going to do, what features are we going to update in the park, what is it that you guys want, and kind of being aware of what else is happening in the community. So if there are already loads of sporting stuff happening, maybe the park can be a place where they can have alone time and really just look at something beautiful and take that oasis time for themselves. But also, if there are other parks nearby that can provide that, maybe this is the park that you can spend time with friends, being more social, more sporting stuff available. And so really it's part of them being part of the whole process when things are changing, and asking not just for feedback, but this is your park, what do we do with it, how do you want to be part of it?
And that was kind of part of about those kind of feeling unwelcome, or the barriers to access, that, you know, often they talked about wanting to get involved in like the community group or the friends group, and it being really inconvenient because meetings are during school or during work hours. And you know, I know from a friends group near me, they're always like, why don't young people want to join our board? It's like, well, because you meet at this time. And I think there was also kind of this perception of being the token young person. We need a young person to do the social media on our group. But also when you said like specific group, I mean, I think we should be mindful that it's 16 to 25, and a big portion of that group is no longer engaging in the educational system. They've got full-time jobs, they're working. And we tend to, I think, kind of naturally want to equate young person with school age, and it's not the whole story about this group. That is that transition from being, you know, younger towards the 16 end and then going up to the 25. And so engaging not just, you know, what do you do in the, you know, your school age, but what do you know, you're a young professional, how do we engage you as well? I think that's something we've put in the further recommendations. We really need to drill down into kind of the details of this cohort.
Muska, how would you like to be involved? I'll be interested to know, like specifically you, because I know you're very busy with loads of different things. You've got school, you've got uni, you've got all the other things that you do.
School and uni, yeah, sorry.
Two different things.
Yeah, to be honest, I haven't actually ever thought about it. It's not like on my top list of stuff. But if I was to like eagerly want to take part in changing green spaces, or just having some sort of say in what is happening to my local green spaces, I think what you were talking about, making the meetings accessible to everyone, is really, really important. But then also, what I'm imagining is like just like a forum where you can put your thoughts. So you can say, oh, I passed by and this event was happening, and that's really cool, so maybe we should do more of that stuff. And then maybe having like a summary kind of situation rather than like a weekly meeting, because that might make more sense. I'm not exactly sure, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's case by case.
Yeah.
One thing I think really helps is we've got Theo here from the Natural History Museum, and they have a youth panel and something like that where you can attach it to what's already happening, and they can feed into not just parks but also what's happening around mental health services. They can feed into different sort of whatever their interests are, and so having a group of young people, and then you can cycle through and invite different types of young people all the time, and you can sort of home them and hopefully pay them and things like that, but case by case.
Just to piggyback onto this, was there anything that came up around the financial sort of challenges that sort of surround a lot of our green spaces with funding? Were they sort of cognizant of those issues?
Yes. Yes, very, very aware. There was a strong sort of idea that local councils and sort of government should be taking care of green spaces more and should be putting more money behind it. Why is it that there was a green space and now there's nothing there and no one uses it? There's something going wrong. And some of them even knew that sort of different types of people who were taking care of their green spaces. So if it was a friends group or if it was a contractor. So all this is really fascinating to me, to know all the differences that they knew. But again, sort of one person definitely said, requiring or relying on the voluntary sector alone is not the way forward, and we're overburdening them, and they're not supposed to be sort of a bandage for the whole system. What they should be is just an additive again, and so that was one thing that was very clear, is the responsibilities that we have as key stakeholders.
And they very pointedly talked about how poorly maintained spaces, seeing broken equipment, had a negative effect on their mental health and well-being. I mean, they connected that very directly, that the lack of funding, the lack of investment, the lack of maintenance made them feel worse than if they had just not gone to the green space at all.
All right, thanks. So I'd say that we've been leading a conversation internally at the RSPB around the word nature and the fact that it means so many different things to different people. A farmer sees nature in a different way to what I would see it. In fact, we think it needs to be democratised and turned into a phrase that everybody understands. But did you face any challenges when it came to using the terms green spaces? Is that something? Is it universal? You found that people understood what it was? Is one person's green space another? Bearing in mind greenwashing and so on. So it'd be interesting to hear if it was a phrase that people understood and could connect with, or it needed some explanation.
I honestly had an issue, I can't lie. When Hamida was speaking to me about it, and she was like, oh, parks and green spaces, and I was like, what are green spaces then? Because aren't parks green spaces? Like, I'm a bit confused. Don't entirely still know the answer, gotta be honest, but...
Yeah, I definitely use them interchangeably.
Yeah, so I'm not entirely sure what the difference is, so I think there is an issue. I don't know if it's that big of an issue. I'm obviously not in the industry, so I'm not entirely sure, but yeah.
Yes.
I just want to share something that a young person said that I think is really important. What she said is young people are under a lot of pressure. They have to go to school, they have very little time, and so they can't come into your meetings. And what she said was that she wanted the voices of young people to be represented by all of us. She said that their voice must be in the meeting, especially to really make time to do things like reports like you have done, so that we work at understanding them and then represent them.
Absolutely. Okay, time. Wow. Thank you so much.
So I want to thank you. I know this could go on longer, but we get chucked out. We don't want to upset our hosts, and we want to give a chance for you to mingle and talk and network. But I really want to thank Meredith, Mosca, and Hamida for leading this session. I wasn't needed. I'm an old man. And thank you for participating and asking questions. Just a quick plug. The cards that you've been given have a QR code on them, and if you use your phone on that, you'll get instant access to the report on your mobile device. So we're saving paper, helping the environment, but you can look at it on the move. So it's quite a long report. Meredith asked me, how long do we want this report to be? And I said, well, no more than 10 pages because people won't read it. I don't know how big it is, but it's full.
It's more than 10.
It's a testament, yes. But I also want to make a plug for the action plan that's in there. which is an interactive document as well. Do get involved with that, because that's the legacy. We don't want it a report on the shelf gathering dust. We want this to be the catalyst to more action, to get young people involved in our parks so that their mental health and well-being can be improved. So thank you one and all for coming. I hope you got a lot out of this evening. I certainly did. I wish it could go on, but yeah. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And thank you.